We had a choice between fish and beef Wellington.
Beef Wellington?
What's that, Dale?
It's beef done in pastry.
And it was an absolute credit to the airline.
Hi, and welcome to our review of the Australian movie, The Castle. Is it The Castle or just Castle?
No, it's called The Castle. Don't want to mistake it for Nathan Fillion's Castle, the seminal TV show.
Never heard of it.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
You may not recognize me, but I'm Saint Buffoonery. I'm the voice you fall asleep to if you've seen any of my videos. But we've decided this time that we're going to put our faces on the on screen. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Lodi, based on channel to be named. You'll be able to find that in the description of this video. But, you know, even though I haven't released anything yet, knowing Sanctioned Buffoonery's editing schedule, I'll probably have 10 videos out by the time this is ready for you to watch.
True. Hurtful, but true. So you're making a channel.
Yeah, so I'm in the process of making the channel, about halfway through editing my first video, which is all about going out into the desert to look at a staircase.
Riveting.
It was really gripping stuff.
You're gonna have what, your photography on there, or just travel videos? What kind of things are we looking for?
Bit of column A, column B, mainly focused on the travel. I've found myself in all sorts of strange situations, from, you know, meeting people that I probably shouldn't meet in Mexico, to seeing like enormous flocks of flamingos in East Africa, to like living amongst Romani in Romania. And this is an opportunity for me to share some of those experiences with others, while also giving off as much bad advice as I can.
Excellent. So the clock is ticking. What will come out first, his channel or this video? We'll see. Would you like to introduce our video for today?
Yeah, would love to. The Castle, released in 1997, is a story about the charming Kerrigan family, a working-class family living unfortunately close to a local airport. The airport, with the backing of the corrupt government, decides to expand its use compulsory acquisition, or as we know it in the US, eminent domain, to take the Kerrigan home away from them. The Castle is the story of their legal struggle to keep their home, their castle. The movie was produced and takes place in the country of Australia, known for its koala bears and spiders, its prime ministers that crap their pants at local McDonald's or eat entire onions on live television. The only good thing to come out of Australia is Margot Robbie, Mel Gibson, and AC/DC. Australia was once a prison colony, and if I have my way, it will be once again. Why did you write this?
I don't know why you would say these horrible things about Australia. I love Australia. Okay, I may have had a hand in writing that and texting it to you and saying, please read this on camera. Yes, leave it. We'll do it live, just like Bill O'Reilly. I just want to give a little bit of an introduction. If you've watched any of my other videos, I kind of give Australia a hard time. I have lots of I work with some Australian people. I know a couple online. They seem like all right people.
Is this like your delicate way of saying I tolerate them, but not I'm friends with any of them?
You know, it's like when someone accuses you of being racist and you say, I've got one black friend. I have that one Australian friend.
Acquaintance.
And he's here now. Good on you, right? So here's the deal. We were talking, and I made a bargain, a bet, if you will, that if he would pick the best Australian movie that he could think of, and then we would discuss it, and then if I like it, then I will then pick my favorite Australian movie for us to review next time. So we'll see what happens with The Castle. He's seen it before, and I have now seen it, and we're ready to review it.
Deciding on The Castle wasn't necessarily an easy decision for me. We came up with a long list of films, potential candidates. There were the obvious choices like Mad Max, Gallipoli,
good movie,
or Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, classic film.
Good movie.
There were the great films that are technically Australian, but really don't hold any intrinsic Australian value, like Slumdog Millionaire or The Matrix, my favorite Australian film. But I feel like The Castle kind of toes that interesting line where it is good because of its Australianness, right? Like it holds its value because it's so tied to not just like being Australian or Australia, but Australia at a very specific point in time for a very specific group of people. We'll get into like what kind of makes that so interesting now, maybe a little later on as we continue to talk, but that's why that decision was made.
The Matrix is Australian?
Yeah, the Wachowskis are Australian. It was filmed in either Melbourne or Sydney. I'll need to like Google that. And a lot of the crew are Aussie.
I did not know that. I didn't know that was one of our choices. We could have picked that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's not too late.
It's okay. Let's not focus on who's at fault here. As Lodi said earlier from the script that he clearly wrote, The Castle is really the story about this family that lives next to an airport. The airport's expanding. The government's come in and says, you got to move. And they're a working class family. They've got really just only each other. And stop me if I'm wrong. The concept of castle comes from that phrase that your home is your castle.
Yeah, but specifically in the film, it's a man's home is his castle, because there's like a lot of patriarchy kind of embedded into that film.
I know, that's one of the reasons I liked it.
Me too.
So, it is the story of the Kerrigan family, and in addition to being the story of them fighting this eminent domain case, the family is unique and charming, and they all have their little quirks, and the whole film is shot in a, I don't know if you would agree, but like, would you say this is like a pseudo documentary in some parts?
Yeah, it's like, it's not quite got that The Office quality where, somebody cracks a really bad joke and your John Krasinski's go, but it has got, because it does, like the opening cuts to Dale.
Right.
And it has that narration from Dale. And I think that adds a lot to the authenticity, or rather the fake authenticity of the film. So yeah, I've never thought of it through that context before, but I do get where you're coming from. I kind of see that myself.
I think it's that narration that kind of makes it feel like that this is Dale's story, and then he's telling it as the events are happening.
But they also play with that a lot, in ways that I think really touch on like the heart of the film. Like the narration will often contradict the scene that's happening, or will repeat the scene that's happening,
or be exactly what's happening in the scene. Yes. Yep. No, I thought that was some of the funnier parts was that the dad he thought that the oldest son that he really thought his son was an ideas man. And right the next scene he's like, hey, you're an ideas man. So that was pretty clever. It never really got old. That part.
My favorite bit is when he's visiting his brother Wayne in prison, and the conversation is, "How's Dad? Oh, good. How's Steve? Good. How's Trace? Good. Good." And that goes on for like every character before ending on the narration saying, "Wayne and I could talk for hours."
It is a bit of a segue. It never really gets old. I don't think that it never. They don't overdo it in the movie, in my opinion. It seems the movie kind of flies by, and you don't really get bogged down in that type of repetition. So I thought it was pretty good in that regard. But as far as the plot goes, it goes all the way up to through the Australian judicial system, and it ends up in the Australian Supreme Court. What's it called?
It's Supreme Court or High Court. I cannot remember what our
You're not really Australian, are you? New Zealand? Anyway, Lodi's a fake Australian, doesn't even know his own high court. But anyway, and
Isn't that the most Australian thing in the, like, isn't that as Australian as you can get to be like, I care so little about my government, I don't know what they're called?
you tell me.
Yes.
You're the first one I've met. No, I'm just joking. So it ends up in the high court, and I don't want to give away any spoilers for a 30-year-old movie, so I won't. I really want to spotlight the character work that's in the movie, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the plot is quite simple, but it's really the characters that I found myself drawn to when I watched the movie.
So what I find really fascinating about the characters is, in the film in general, is like it's never they're dumb. Mm-hmm. Like they're not intelligent characters, and a lot of the punchlines are at the expense of their intelligence. Right? Like one part that sticks out to mind is, oh, have you ever had your soil tested? Oh yeah, there's stuff in it. Oh, do you know what? Oh, just stuff. Yeah. What do you know about lead?
Yeah, and then hard cut.
Yeah.
That is great.
But what's interesting is that it's never played in a way where we're laughing at them. It's almost like we're laughing with them.
Yes.
And when I was watching it in this most recent viewing, I was really trying to think, how did they achieve that? Because it is astounding to me just how thick these characters are, and yet it never feels mean. And I think it's the music.
Oh, really?
Right? Yeah, like the scene where he's getting all the presents for the first time, or when he's
Right.
talking about his wife, like, oh, what's this? Chicken? And what's this stuff on top of it? Seasoning? The music's like quite heroic and endearing, and I think that like honesty, well, rather, I think it kind of plays into the honesty. It makes it feel earnest and warm.
Did you notice that whenever they were around the dinner table, it was almost like a Norman Rockwell painting, and the music, like you said, the music matched, and it was like, it kind of reminded me of, like, I started getting vibes from like the Christmas Story, where it's like there's a bit of dysfunction there, but they really do love each other, and they say things that are like, it would be funny to them, but I don't know if it's as funny to us because we're watching from the outside, but it's endearing to watch them, have
Like
a
when he's
family
talking
dinner.
about, like towing cars, and there's obviously inside jokes that we don't get.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. I get where you're coming from. I imagined it as if the camera was placed so close to the table that it, and by extension us as the viewers, are members of the family with them.
Right.
That was what my thinking behind it was. But I like your interpretation too.
I like my interpretation too as well. Well, since we're already talking about it, let me go ahead and talk to you about the characters.
Go for it.
Because I remember all of them.
Yeah, their names are very clearly in my mind as well.
Look, there's the dad, there's the mom, there's three brothers, and there's Eric Bana. Eric Bana is the only actor I recognize in this movie.
And there's a sister
And there's also a sister.
that Eric Bana's married to.
That's right. So Daryl Kerrigan's the dad. It's the Kerrigan family. Sal's the mom, right?
Yep.
Dale's the narrator and one of the sons. Steve, I wrote, he's the son with the deals. He's the ideas man.
Yeah, he's got two bits. His entire shtick in the whole film is to look up deals and say, and be told, tell them they're dreaming.
That's right. He sets up his dad for the
punchline.
Right, for the punchline.
Yeah. Or he sets his dad up for the other punchline of, oh, you're an ideas man, Steve.
Right. And so I think he may be one of my favorite characters.
Because he has nothing to do.
He just sits there and he's looking through the newspaper, their trade newspaper, and he'll say, oh, someone's got a broken pool cue, and then the dad will say, well, how much do they want for it? And then no matter what the price is, I don't even know if the dad's listening. Well, no matter what the price is, he goes, tell them they're dreaming.
Yeah.
And it's just done. It sounds corny now that we're saying it, but
It's just played so honestly.
Yes.
And it's very charming.
Wayne's the brother in jail,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Okay, good. I got that right. Tracy's the sister,
Or Trace.
Trace, and her claim to fame is that she was on one episode of Australian Price is Right.
And no, she's got 2 claims to fame.
Okay.
She was on one episode of Australia's Price is Right.
Yeah,
And she also went to hair school.
that's right.
So she has the highest education in the family.
That's right. So she is treated like other families would treat like doctors and lawyers. Like she went to hair school, and that's.
I want to say your accent was spot on, by the way.
I know. I've been practicing in the mirror. And then Eric Bana plays Eric Bana, also known as Con Petropoulos.
Sorry, what?
Con?
You got that part right. I heard
his
that.
name's Con. Like at first I thought he was like an ex-con. But then
No, that's the whole country.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Now who's being racist against Australians?
I can be.
So when they're getting married,
Yeah.
so Con Petropoulos is coming
But
from
I think that was a bit as well. I think that's Daryl getting their name wrong.
No, I meant the part where he starts.
Oh,
Daryl's giving a speech about at the wedding, and
he's like, you know what they say about the Greeks,
and he's
all
trying
that-
to be nice, and he's like, those Greeks, they say these things, and then you could kind of see the Greek family just be like, oh no.
He's got that one punchline where he's like, I'm happy to pay for the wedding, just stop breaking the plates.
Right, but then even in the movie, the Greek side of the family realizes that he's at least trying to be sincere.
Yes, yeah.
So they lighten up after a while. So that part was, not only was that part funny, but it was also, I think, a good kind of symbol for the rest of the movie. It's like,
Yeah.
if you look at it kind of clinically, it's like, oh, these I guess hillbillies, Australian hillbillies, but they really are. I got not only Christmas Story vibes, but I got like early Simpsons vibes.
Oh, yeah.
Where it was more like focused on like
was
Homer
like,
providing
yeah.
for the family, and like Flintstones.
And there's like still heart to it. Yeah, I
Yes.
think Flintstones is a very,
Yes.
very apt comparison.
So the neighbors. Oh, and that's another thing. All the neighbors are being evicted too.
So one thing I want to note on
Yeah.
the neighbors, all the neighbors kind of represent different parts or different groups of Australia at that time, right? Like you've got the refugee from the debalkanization with...
Which their
Farouk.
name is. Very good.
Thank you, there's Farouk. And then there's the real old fella who's like outlived everyone else in his family.
And his name is.
Jack.
Very good.
And there's the woman.
And her name is.
I can't remember, is it Beatrice?
Close. Yvonne.
That's the...
And even though they don't have a lot of screen time, they do a great job, I think, of not being stereotypes and not being. You learn a lot about them. Like Farouk, for example, he's from Lebanon, or he's lived in Lebanon before, and he's.
So he's not from the debalkanization.
No, he's not. I just let you slide on that one.
generalization.
Because he makes a couple comments about being
he
an
makes a couple
Arab
comments
in
about-
Australia.
Yeah, but he also makes some comments about bombs as well.
Well, they have bombs in Lebanon.
Do they?
That's being cut. Jack is a retiree,
Yes.
a pensioner, I think you would call
A
him.
pensioner, yeah.
And he's down on his luck, and he had to move from another place that basically bled him dry, and now this is all he's got.
Yeah.
Yvonne is, and I'm doing this from memory. I'm just looking at their names. For some reason, I don't remember their names. Yvonne is a divorcee that had a bad breakup, and that her motivation is she can't really find another place that cheap, and she kind of feels like there's a part in the movie where she gives like 2 sentences, and you completely understand where she's coming from, that the government is kind of treating her the way her ex-husband like she's making that connection. So, and then there's Dennis Denudo, the lawyer.
Oh, Dennis is classic. My favorite line to do with Dennis, or my favorite bit about Dennis, is also like another setup for Daryl, but it's that he was Wayne's lawyer, and that's why they're hiring Dennis again. Not because he got Wayne out of prison. He just tried really hard.
It's hilarious that it was,
Yeah.
he gave a good effort. And even in the movie, they talk
Yeah,
about
Daryl
like,
says you put in your best effort.
right, and he's like, well, he's still in jail. Like
He's still in jail for 8 years.
Right. No, but you tried.
Yeah.
So we like you, which is, I think, a great,
Well,
great message about him and the
Mm-hmm.
entire Kerrigan family.
I think it's an entire message about Australia, and I think that's the point. That's like the point of the film, is this whole like underdog mentality.
Right.
Here we go.
And spiders.
And like enormous spiders.
That's right. Dennis Denuto, maybe he's my favorite character because he's clearly in over his head. He's a small court, local lawyer. He kind of gives off like, and he kind of reminds me, gives off these Rodney Dangerfield vibes because his tie's not quite right. And he's kind of dressed like a slob, and he's like, I'm in over my head, and he's overwhelmed. He has a daily fight with his copier, which is kind of funny. And then he's catapulted into this, eventually going into like real court.
Like one of the most important cases in Australia.
And he's kind of, if you want to talk about underdogs, he's really the underdog because he's, through his own admission, out of his depth. And he's like, look, you've got to go get a real lawyer to come to handle this case. But Daryl convinces him, because he's such a kind person, and he's like, you tried so hard for my son that we really want you to take this case. We don't want a big city lawyer.
I mean, Daryl's kind of like one of his greyhounds. Like, he's just so sweet that you can't really say no, like, to those puppy eyes.
Greyhounds as in dogs. One of the...
Oh, not your buses?
No, not the buses. They're not called... I guess they're not called greyhounds in...
There's more countries in America, right?
Well... There's one thing that we haven't mentioned about that I think that is important is everything around their house is like collected items from their adventures in the in Daryl's working with the tow industry.
Random things they've bought from the trade paper.
Right. They'll have and I want to point this part out because I really thought I really liked this part. So he essentially, it sounds like he had a house when they moved in. And then they kept on building upon it. And one of the things they built was a pool room. And do you want to talk about the pool room? Because that is a recurring theme in the movie.
So like that, what's beautiful about the pool room is like my dad would have had a pool room. His dad would have had the pool room is this like Aussie state icon of. It's almost as if all dads, as if they were Taylor Swift fans, formed a hive mind. Where Taylor Swift, like how Swifties can all communicate telepathically.
Is this an Australian person?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. She was in Australia recently, actually.
You can keep her. Oh no, I'm cutting that out because I'll get all the Swifties after me.
What's interesting about the pool room is it's like this universal truth in Australia. It's almost like all Australian dads at that point in time had a hive mind that was like, we need a pool room to have our things. And so, like, the greatest achievement you can get in a household is to, like, draw something in school, give it to your dad, and have him go, that's going up in the pool room.
And that is something that...
If this stays in, which I hope it does, someone has just flushed a toilet above us. We can still hear it.
That must have been a big one. And I'm going to put the name and address of the person flushing the toilet right on the bottom of this screen. Yeah, the pool room, I guess, by American, an American equivalent would be a combination of, like, we call it the den, where it's like maybe in the 80s, it's like a place for dads to go and like kind of have like their own time. They keep their books in there and their decanter full of scotch or whatever.
In Married with Children, it's the toilet.
In Married with Children, it's definitely the toilet. And then but in this movie, and it sounds like in Australian culture, it's also like the refrigerator door, like
No, it's where the second fridge is.
Right, but I mean the refrigerator door is in like
Yeah.
You did a great job at school today, kid.
Oh,
It's going up on
yes.
the
Yeah,
refrigerator
yeah, yeah,
door.
yeah.
It's like a big mantle, in American, over the fireplace, in American equivalents, that you put all your trophies in there. And it's another way for Daryl to kind of give like the ultimate compliment. That if you get him a gift, he's so sincerely happy about it, about receiving it. He's like, this is going in the pool room.
Did you notice with the pool room that the pool table is slanted?
Yes.
Because he built it?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes. There's a lot of little things that you see that's like,
Very subtle, yeah.
they got it, they built it, they found it at work, or they got it in the, what do you call it, trade paper?
Yeah, the trade paper.
Okay, you're right.
And I think, and like all of those elements, like the fact that their castle is by no means what anyone would deem a castle. It's just a home with like these extensions that protrude from it like tumors. Like even their house is emblematic of that underdog nature. Like it is a scrappy house, barely even standing up at this point. Like leaning over from all of the extensions and the giant aerial that he's so proud of.
Well, it's like
Yeah.
part of my family is they've bought a house and then they kept expanding upon it, and as they got money or didn't have money, that determined how much they were able to improve their homes. And one of the things is like, they want, I had an uncle that said he wanted a satellite dish, and living in a trailer, and you're like, you look back on it and you're like, what are your priorities? And this was like the 80s, so it wasn't like this dish. It was like one of those giant dishes that you can get like every channel in the world. And it was something that stood out like a sore thumb, but that was kind of what made it his home, was
Yeah.
that's his
It's like his point
satellite
of
dish.
pride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where it comes back to that theme of the castle. Your man's home. The man's home is the castle. And
Yeah.
It's without saying it, you get very quickly the sense that this is of value that normal people can't understand.
And they do a lot to like establish the emotional connection between the Kerrigans and specifically the location.
Right.
So that when, the airport comes in and they're like, oh, this is just like a real terrible house on like really low valued land built on lead next to power lines and the airport. Like it's not actually worth anything. And then there's that like theme of, well, you can't put a value on place. You can't put a value on home.
I really like that theme and the way they illustrated it kind of through Daryl's eyes, where people, you would ask, like, doesn't the constant landing of planes bother you? And that and the power lines he compared to, like, no, they're the reminder. First of all, the airplanes are beautiful machines. They're flying through the sky, and he's just this
And he
kind of
excitedly says,
Right.
you don't know if it's going to land on you.
right. And he's just completely fascinated by
Yeah.
them, and he's just like, this is, every time he hears one or sees one, it's a great thing to him, and he's equally as happy about we don't mean like regular power lines, like the mains, and those are going right across their property, and he looks up and he compares them to a symbol of mankind's like conquering of nature. Like
No, it's even worse than that. It's a symbol of mankind's ability to generate electricity.
That's right. Okay, it's simpler than that. But yeah, it was. He looks at it like with reverence.
So what's interesting is every time I remember that scene,
Mm-hmm.
I remember it as it's mankind's ability to overcome obstacals. It's mankind's ability, and I
That's how I
give it this
remember it.
grandiose nature.
Right.
And in my most recent rewatch, when I'm like taking notes for this,
Right.
I finally like heard what was said and thought, oh man, it's just did not dawn on me. I think it's the music. Like they really swell up what is being said that you think it's important, but it's not.
I totally fell for it because
Yeah.
I was like, I thought it was a symbol of man's like triumph over history.
Yeah, and no, just generate electricity.
No, and he looks at it he just sits there drinking his coffee with a big smile on his face, looking at those power lines, and where other people are like, oh God, that's going to give us cancer. Did you notice that, do you remember the name of the property they went
Bonnie
to?
Doon?
Bonnie Doon.
We're
So
going
they
to
have a lake house, or I don't know if they rent it or what, but they have a lake house, which I think if you look at like the real estate, it's actually I think nicer than their home.
Oh, it's way nicer, but it's
Right.
also got power
Yeah, did you notice it has power lines
just
over that too?
everywhere.
I'm sure it was like, hey, I get to save 10% because it's under power lines, and he's like, I'll take it.
Yeah, he probably would have been like, "There's power lines, steal."
It's funny in the movie. I have no idea what Bonnie Doon was.
It's an actual place.
I'm sure it is, but they visit Wayne in jail, and the younger brother, Steve
Dale.
Dale.
Dale's the youngest.
Dale visits Wayne in jail, and he narrates that he's conflicted because he doesn't want to tell Wayne that they're going to they're going to visit Bonnie Doon. I was like, is this a person? Is like, what's a Bonnie Doon? I don't know what it is. And like, there's like 10 minutes that they keep referring to it like I should know what it is. And then they get out there, and it's like a little reservoir. It's a reservoir lake with the lakefront property, and it's still kind of a working class area, but it's quite nice, and it's from a certain perspective, it's nicer than what they could give that up, sell the property by the airport, and go live in Bonnie Doon all year round. But it was such a big deal, and then even at the end, it comes. Did you notice at the end
He takes Laurie to Bonnie
yeah,
Doon?
he takes we can't tell you who that is because it would spoil the movie. But yeah, there's a little payoff at the end about that as well.
Yeah. So all of this kind of builds together to this theme of underdog. I've said it a lot, but I think that's so intrinsic to like the Australian experience. Where we were a country that was colonized like pretty late into that era of colonialism.
You were?
I know.
By who?
The English, and we were a penal colony, which means prison.
Oh, is that what that means? That's not what HR said.
That also plays into it as well. We're a bunch of penals, or convicts, as other people call them, where we're predominantly working class. Our first major military expedition on a global stage is regarded as like one of the worst military failures of all time. When we invaded Turkey for
Turkey? Like
yeah.
Turkey on the doorstep of Europe, Turkey?
Yeah, in the First World War, fighting on behalf of the British,
Hold on. And I don't mean any stereotypes by this.
Go.
But was the captain of the ship drunk and took a left instead of taking a right, was heading to the Philippines, but ended up in Turkey?
So it's actually funny you say that. There is this myth.
Soldiers died in this, by the way. Tell me how it's funny.
Thousands of them.
Tell me how it's
19.
funny.
No, it's funny that you mentioned did they go the wrong way?
All right.
Because the boats did actually go the wrong way. They landed in the wrong spot. Like everything went wrong for this landing.
Why don't you first go?
And well, here's the thing. All of it's relevant to the castle, not because anyone in that film goes to war, but because it builds this sense of like, we don't pride ourselves on success. We almost pride ourselves on being the little guy. And I think that feeling, like if you consider it, every main character who has a voice is a little guy. Jack, his neighbor's a little guy, the pensioner. Farouk is a little guy. The Kerrigan families are the little guys. Dennis Denudo's the little guy. And every character that doesn't have a voice, that doesn't get any major screen time or any sympathy, are the big guy. It's the government, it's the airport, it's business. And I think that very much is one of the reasons why it's been so culturally important to Australia.
I got now of course, I'm not Australian, so I got a different message, I think similar. But I wanted to ask you before we go any further, there's a scene in the movie where you mentioned Farouk. And there's a scene in the movie where Daryl says something to Farouk that perked my ears up. I'm always looking for ways to fine-tune my racism. But Daryl and all the neighbors are having their meeting, and they're going to the next level of court. I think not the highest, but maybe the one before that. And then they're talking about the price. How much is it going to cost to pay their lawyer, Dennis Denudo? And it's a sign of the times and the sign of the economy. the whole cost is like $1,500 just to pay Dennis Nuno, or it's like $1,500 now, $1,500 later. But that's like a fraction of what I paid for lawyers to fix my taxes. So it's so funny to hear such a low price for lawyers. But that's not my question. The question is, so Daryl's going around saying it's going to be this much per person, and being a nice guy that he is, he tells Jack, I know you can't kick in now, but I'll kick in for you. And then Farouk pulls out this wad of cash and says, here you go, I'm ready to pay. And two things struck me.
Go for it.
Number one, it was funny for a movie of that. I mean, it's not extremely old of a movie, but it struck me that Daryl had such a reaction to cash, like, whoa, you know, I don't know what kind of payment he was expecting, like a check. You would think even back then, cash would be king.
Maybe
like now you say like
startled,
PayPal me, you know, he couldn't do
just
that.
Venmo.
Right, he couldn't Venmo
Hit my
back then.
OnlyFans.
And then he says something that got my attention.
Yeah.
He's in response to
So
Farouk.
hold on, I just want to clarify here.
Yeah.
You said this is to upgrade your racism.
I'm getting to that.
Okay.
He looks at Farouk and he says, what is it with wogs and cash? Now, I don't know what the word, I think it's W-O-G. I don't know what that word means.
I wouldn't know how to spell it.
Do you know, is this a racist thing?
Yeah, it's a
Well, first of all, is it wog?
yeah, it's
Okay.
wog is a derogatory term for people from Europe, but particularly Eastern Europe or the Middle East,
Okay.
but predominantly Eastern Europe.
Okay. But it's pronounced, it's W-O-G. It's pronounced wog.
Yeah, it's pronounced wog. Why do I keep bleeping?
Well, because you're Australian. It's a bad word in Australia. It doesn't mean anything in America. Wait, but now I know what it means. I agree with what you're saying, and I think that, like I said earlier, I think that not being Australian, I might have missed some of that.
Yep.
Well, I got a very different theme out of this movie than what you got. And
Okay.
I'm not saying it's worse or better, but clearly I'm correct. It's the case of the little guy fighting against the big guy.
Yeah.
Concerning eminent domain, and it's called something else in Australia. It's not. It's the same thing in America.
Compulsory acquisition.
That's it. But I have some strong feelings about eminent domain, and you know, on this channel, I try not to talk about politics at all.
Look, I've already spoken about politics and the importance of the theming to the film. I think this is a movie where you do kind of have to get your hands dirty a little bit. Tell me your thoughts.
Eminent domain is a gross overreach by the government. It is something that crushes the rights house and home, the little man, in order to all it is somewhere else. They're expecting 90% of the wealth and land, every property, a major corporation somehow beholden to the state, that are in league with the government. The government can come take the property whenever they have to oppose the collectivist theory that. But we don't talk about politics here.
Anyway, speaking about politics.
Hold on. I will tell you one thing that this movie reminded me of. Do you know who Killdozer is?
Is that like a wrestler?
He wrestled with the government.
Is he like a real dude?
Yeah, he's a real dude. Would you like
How
me
have
to
I not heard of Killdozer?
I mean, that's not his Christian name. So,
Is it like his middle name? Like he's Keith Killdozer Stevens?
Killdozer is a name that has been anointed to him posthumously. So, Killdozer...
Sorry, I'm just laughing at how you said posthumously.
Killdozer ran a muffler shop in Colorado, and the local business, a cement company, I believe, don't quote me on any of this, I'm giving him the short version, this cement company teamed up with the government, the local government, and they enacted an eminent domain because they wanted that property, his property, to expand this concrete business. And he said no, just like in this movie. Except there's one tiny difference. You've really never heard of Killdozer.
No, I've genuinely never heard of Killdozer.
Okay.
I think based on his name, I'm starting to get a picture as to where this is going.
Yes, it wasn't Joy Dozer. I'm
It
gonna be
wasn't, I won an eminent domain case dozer.
I'm going to be showing footage of Killdozer behind us as I tell this story. So the cement company and the government start harassing him. And I don't mean like, I'm not picking sides here, but it's legitimately harassing him. And instead of the charming story of Australian family going to the Supreme Court, Jimmy Killdozer, or whatever his real name is, decided that he was going to build himself a armored, bulletproof fighting vehicle that was, the frame was placed upon a bulldozer. And
Is this real?
this is a real story. And his way of getting back versus eminent domain was to, the final straw was they blocked his entrance. He couldn't even get in and out of his own like house and like I want to say muffler place, but I could be wrong. So he builds like this A-team. Do you know what the A-team is?
Yeah.
Okay. This like A-team style, like Top Gear, super bulletproof monster made on a bulldozer. And then he drives out of his muffler shop and he goes through town, this little town, destroying the businesses and government buildings of
Jesus.
everyone that wronged him. And the bottom line is, he didn't kill anybody. He made sure. Now I don't know if this.
Hold
is
on, I don't want to
purpose.
clarify. I'm not disappointed by that. I'm surprised. That was not a disappointment, Si.
I don't want to disappoint you, but no one died.
Good.
But people think, and part of the legend is that he targeted parts of buildings and also the time of day where he
Right.
wouldn't have civilian casualties.
Well, that's nice.
And well, the reason he's called Killdozer is because he drove it, I think, into like a ravine and he got trapped. Oh, a roof collapsed in on him, and he couldn't get out, and he.
This sounds like you know how there was that era of America grabbing British TV shows and making an American remake
You
of
mean
them?
current day?
That's the one.
Yeah.
This sounds like the American remake of The Castle.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, they're basically the same story. There is a scene where
There is actually a
there
scene
is a
where
scene.
he does
Go
get his-
ahead.
yeah. He gets his tow truck out and he tries to steal a fence.
But it's one of those big like rich people fences.
No, he does steal it and then he puts it up in his house.
Right. And the cops come and they're like, he's like, "Did you steal the fence?" And he goes, "I don't know what you're talking about." And then the cops of course, it's his friend. It's a small town, so he kind of leans in and he goes, "Look, I know you're mad. I know they're treating you wrong, but you can't do this." And he's like, "You know what? Yes, sir. I don't know what you're talking about." And he goes, "Get the bloody thing out of your front yard," because all they did was drive it home that night and go inside.
and just leave it there.
They just left it there.
Yeah, good stuff.
But anyway, back to Killdozer.
Yeah,
No, that's the end of the story.
back to politics.
Okay.
The one thing that I did want to bring up that's not eminent, that's like tangentially eminent domain related, is there's like an interesting discussion now, several years after the castle's come out. And one thing that was so important about the castle, there's this scene where Daryl, it kind of dawns on Daryl the indigenous experience of having their land taken, and he equates it to his experience of his house being taken.
There's a famous case they mentioned in the movie that I was like completely unaware of.
So yeah, it's the Mabo case, or pioneered by Eddie Mabo. I had to take
Now
notes.
that sounds like a bad word.
Eddie Mabo.
Marbo.
Are you suggesting that one of Australia's most important Indigenous people is a bad word?
That's not even the worst thing I've said about Australia in the past like 20 minutes. So yes.
That's a good point. So this was the Eddie Mabo case was in 1992, which is only 5 years
after
before
you were born.
It's actually before I was born. You would have been like, were you 50 then?
Shut up.
So, the Mabo case came out happened in 1992, and then the film comes out in 1997, and it's almost like this way of equating the Australian experience to the Indigenous Australian experience as a means to maybe build connection, but viewed through a modern lens, it comes dangerously close to like appropriating the indigenous experience.
Well,
And-
it doesn't help in the movie that it sounds like the only reason they kind of went down that road is because Denudo, the lawyer, didn't have a case, didn't know what to argue, so it becomes a constitutional case.
Yep.
Almost through the insults of the judges. Like I'm sorry, the law says this. Why should we even bother to listen to you? And he scrambles and it becomes this constitutional case. And I think it's from Daryl mentioning that the Marbo case, that it says, well, because they won, and it's another eminent domain.
It's like, well, no. So theirs isn't even eminent domain.
Oh,
theirs is different. So the Marbo case is, and that's why I think it's so interesting viewed through a modern lens of, I don't know if that really sits well anymore. So Eddie Marbo's case, he came from Murray Island. He's a Torres Strait Islander. They're these islands between Queensland and Papua New Guinea. So they're in the northeast of Australia.
Seen here.
So he's a Torres Strait Islander, and when Captain Cook arrived to Australia and the Torres Strait Islands, he declared terra nullius. Terra nullius is this legal term.
Sounds delicious.
So it's this legal term that says no one is here. It means land, no people, like terra nullius, land that no one owns.
Is this going to end with there was no one there that looked like him?
So there was no one there that looked like him,
Okay.
and that therefore meant that there was no one there in these lands.
Gotcha.
He declared that they weren't owned by anyone, and therefore, because no one owns this land, I can take it for the Queen.
Gotcha.
That's what terra nullius means, is I can, no one's here, I can take it for the Queen.
All right.
And Eddie Marbo's like landmark case was kind of proving there were people on my island. There were people in Murray Island. There are people that still wish to practice our rights in Murray Island. Murray Island is our land. It is not land owned by the government.
So Daryl is comparing his tiny little house next to an airport to a very historical and very culturally important, impactful case.
Not just that, very recent as well, because there's a 5-year gap.
Only 5-year gap, that's right.
Not just only a 5-year gap, because so Marbo himself passed away even before he'd won the case. So he never even got to see his case.
Or the movie.
So in the midst of people still, getting their land back, this movie comes out and they say, unintentionally, it's almost like, we went through it too. And it hasn't really aged all that well. Like that aspect of the film. I still think, a lot of the film still holds up and it's still one of my favorite Australian films. But there is that element that viewed at an age maybe older than when I first watched it, I kind of go, I don't know how I feel about this one element anymore.
But I think that you have a point, but I'm going to push back a little bit on that.
Go for it.
I think people watch movies in relation to the time that they're in. Mm-hmm. And I think that is an unfair comparison.
Yeah, very much so.
That, especially in this case where you're talking about not only I don't want to say simpleton, but he's not culturally with it, even by those times.
Yeah.
And I say those times, it's pushing on 40 years now. But it's not ancient history, but it's old enough to where it's like, there were certain things certain perceptions that you could say or do or have, and it was more normal than now where everyone's all hypersensitive about everything.
Kind of like the patriarchy joke that we made earlier,
Joke? So go on.
The idea of the patriarchy being such a staple in the household is maybe, a product of coming out in the 90s.
Right, and it was actually, regardless of how you feel about the patriarchy, it was actually kind of refreshing to have a family dinner scene.
Yeah.
And it was, there's some bad things that happened in history, but it's like that part was like, oh, this is this is a dated movie, and there's value to that. And I think that people look at things, and I don't know if they're intentionally trying to kind of like pick it apart, but I think it's difficult for some people to look at it as through the lens of, this is the way this character is, this is the way this movie is, this is the time period this is from, and I think it's something that it diminishes the impact that some of these older movies have.
Well, I think it comes back to what we were saying earlier as well, is that the film isn't mean. Like
Correct.
It's not making fun of these people. I mean, it kind of is, but it's not doing it in a nasty way.
Well, it's almost like they're making fun of him by relating, it sounds like, that he's relating to his relatively small case to this
enormous,
huge
landmark.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that is the joke, but there is a little part of me that does kind of go, oh.
It just didn't age well with communists.
It is an example of communism.
Everything's an example of communism. I agree with you to a certain extent, but I don't think it diminishes the film at all. And I'm glad, after hearing your explanation, that they didn't waste my time in the movie explaining it the way you did. So, I know you like the film, you picked the film, but what is it about it that you really enjoy that sticks with you after all these years?
I can pinpoint exactly why this is my favorite Australian film, and it's a very Daryl Kerrigan kind of moment. My granddad was, in our household, the smartest man in the whole world. He knew everything about everything. He had traveled the world, and this is legit. He was a very intelligent man, but he was also he was a milkman. He ran farms. He cleaned. He was like a cleaner for a while in hotels, like very salt of the earth type. And his pool room was his fishing room, and this was his favorite film. And this and Roger Ramjet, the TV show. That's
Never heard
legit.
of it.
Really? You should watch it. So this was his favorite film, and when you approached me and said, "Oh, we should watch an Australian movie,"
I think what I said was, "Hey, you're Australian. We should watch an Australian." What, does she got the shits?
You've met
Quit
her.
flushing, you wog.
And so when you approached me and said, "Oi, you're Australian. What's an Australian movie?"
That is verbatim what I said.
That
I
it
think
is-
I yelled it across a meeting room.
Yeah, if I recall, you actually said, "Oi, wog, I hear you're Australian." I
That's
had to
not possible
correct
because I
you.
just learned that word. Now, tomorrow, it's coming out.
Oh, left, right, and center.
That's right. So I said, "Hey, oi, Australian. Aren't you Australian?" So this is your story.
Yeah, you said, "Oi, aren't you Australian?"
Oi, Steve Irwin. Oh, I better be
Too
careful.
soon.
That
Too
man's a
soon.
national hero.
He is. So yeah, you asked what is my favorite Australian movie, and it may not be the best movie that's ever been made in Australia, but it is the most Australian movie.
Not being Australian, again, I would say I agree, but I think it has a lot of, I'll go ahead and say what I think. Now, there is a wager on this because when I heard about the movie, I saw the trailer, I thought this would be a slam dunk, that I would not like this movie, that it would be a artsy-fartsy,
You watched the trailer and went, "This is an art house film."
This is an art house film, basically. Exactly.
Yeah.
There's very little killing in it. There's a shocking lack of nudity in it, and I can say after watching it that I kind of loved it, but I loved it for non-Australian reasons. That all the characters are very charming. The story is almost irrelevant compared to the power of the family dynamic, and they just seem so wholesome. It's like
Right.
you get to a point now, it's almost like watching science fiction compared to what's the crap that's out there nowadays. And I look at the family dynamic and okay, I think we mentioned it earlier. So the mom, the wife, is cooking.
Sal.
Is cooking food that is. It looks good, but it's not exactly like gourmet. What
She's
we would
cooking
consider-
rissoles.
She's just cooking for people, right? But every time she set that plate down, Daryl would have to stop everything and and I remember this once he has to compliment it, but it's not even like a phony compliment, like, oh wow, look how good it is. It's so sincere and it's so like you just kind of want to hang out with them. And then there's
It's almost like the line that like an Al Bundy or a cynical dad character would have, and they would say sarcastically.
right.
But he says it with honesty.
Right.
Yeah.
And the two boys that are not in jail are in agreement completely. And then he turns to them and he gives a mini like father lesson about how that why would we go to a restaurant when we've got this
Every night.
chicken
Yeah.
and rice, something quite simple. And he'll
Sponge
look
cake.
he'll look at sponge cake and he's like,
Wait.
"What's this on the top?" And she's like, "Powdered sugar."
Yeah.
And he's like, wow. And it's not like sarcasm, which that was the
Like, he
part.
means it,
He
yeah.
means it. And that was the part that's like, you start the movie and it's like, these people are simpletons. But then you're just like, no, they're not. They're genuinely good people.
Mm-hmm.
We've just been so conditioned out of it that it looks foreign to us.
Yeah.
And I think that by a third of the way into the movie, I just felt like it was just like refreshing to
Yep.
watch it. So that means I have lost this bet,
Right.
but I kind of prepared for it because no one gets one over on me.
So now that we've watched one Australian film and I've proved that we have good cinema,
Yep.
You have to choose a film.
Yep. I'm texting you the title of this. I mean, one of the best Australian movies I've ever seen. I'm kind of surprised it didn't win the Academy Award, actually.
Okay.
And I'm sending you the title right now. Check your phone.
We're done here.